Um, Bonjour, good morning, and I just want to thank Jennifer Lee and Jessica for having me today to bring the patient perspective to your meeting. I didn't know what SOCRA was until I was invited, and I never knew how many people it took to get a clinical trial up and running and to keep it going and to comply with everything. So I just thank you for all your hard work. I believe that the clinical trial participant is the most valuable resource in all of this endeavors. We put the new agents or the new strategy into our own bodies, and we volunteer to do that. And sometimes we have to choose between different things. But at the end of the day, whether the new intervention works or not, you are the folks that make sure that our effort, it matters, that we learn, whether we learn that this is something better we should be doing, or whether we learn, this is not the way. The integrity that you bring to the entire process is so essential, and it holds everything together. And I just thank you on behalf of patients everywhere. And also, I'm apologizing a little bit if I get a little off. I haven't seen my slides in a while, so I don't know what's going on with the animation. And before I connected to fly up here yesterday, I was visiting a support group in rural Georgia, and I kind of took my notes out to get them in my head, and I left them on the first plane. So we're going to do what we can here, but I have nothing to disclose. And here's a little bit of my journey. When I tell my story to medical students, what I say is in December of 2003, on my birthday, I woke up, I looked in the mirror, and I said, damn, 40 looks good on me. 6 months later, I woke up from exploratory surgery and found out I had ovarian cancer. Now, up until that time, cancer wasn't on my radar. I'm half Filipino, half Puerto Rican, and there's a lot of people in my family, and very little cancer of any kind. I had a lot of twists and turns in my journey that I'm not going to go into in detail, but I did end up needing to have 3 major surgeries. The last was a partial liver resection, 5 different types of treatment, and I participated in a phase 1 remission vaccine clinical trial, and then I got breast cancer, little itty bitty stage 1, but there was no little cancer. What I'm here to talk to you about is how I got interested in clinical trials. And the first time was at support group. I was nearing the end of first-line treatment, and one of my fellow support group members, who was like a month or 2 ahead of me in treatment, came to me after the meeting and said, Annie, look what they want me to do. And she handed me a stack. Now, this is 2004. It's back in the days when they did things by fax. And it's a stack of about 20, 30 pages from a fax machine. And she says, they want me to do this clinical trial. It just sounds so Frankenstein. And so as she's talking to me, I'm kind of flipping through the informed consent and the description. And it was for a remission vaccine, not the sexy checkpoint inhibitors and immunotherapy you see, but a protein. If we can find this protein in your body, will this help people keep their remissions lasting longer? And as I'm flipping through, I'm like, this sounds pretty good. I want a piece of this. So what I did was it was happening at a different place than I was being treated. I started out at a community hospital, and I had my husband go contact my doctor's nurse to get all my medical records that I would need for a second opinion. And the process of getting the second opinion made me very nervous because it felt like cheating. Like, here was the man who kept me alive. He did the surgery, took the cancer out of my body, gave me this really strong medicine that was going to help me live longer and get rid of any cancer that was left behind, and now I'm going to go see someone else? So when you have people coming into your institutions or people who are looking to get a second opinion somewhere else, I hope you make that process easy for them. It was not made easy for me. I found out a day before my appointment that my slides hadn't made it to the other institution. So I actually went to my hospital, picked up my slides, and I went in a cab to go get my second opinion, all the while thinking, I've got my cancer on my lap. So please help your patients, get second opinions. The next time I got interested in clinical trials was at a survivor conference. If you've never been to a survivor conference, I hope you never have to go, okay? So I'm not saying, but there was just something empowering of, it was an ovarian cancer conference with 200 women in the same room, dressed in teal from head to toe. It is the last days of Gynecologic Cancer Awareness Month, if you did not, know that, and ovarian cancer's color is teal. We don't hear that enough, so I'm just putting out a plug. But during this conference, a medical oncologist researcher was presenting about clinical trials and what was available, what was coming through the pipeline. And what she told us was, ladies, ovarian cancer is a really tricky disease. It comes back a lot. And you might want to think about participating in a clinical trial sooner rather than later, because the less chemotherapy that you've had, the more trials that are going to be open to you, and you will have more options. If the study drug doesn't work, the stuff that's already approved is still going to be there waiting for you. And so that concept of having more options really stuck with me, as well as how to keep your options in play, trying to avoid agents that are in clinical trials. There was one thing I had as a single agent for my third line of treatment, and I became interested in a new drug, but everything was being paired with what I already had. So I did not qualify for those types of trials. So anyways, my second recurrence, cancers in the liver, something kept me stable for a while and then it stopped working, and I had to deal with that, this is the rest of my life, that this is probably going to be a chronic disease. And I was actually in a randomized trial for psychotherapy interventions, and I got randomized to the study arm, which was a really great experience and helped me really adjust to that period of time. Fighting cancer is exhausting, and I had to do a lot of work in my head to go from fighting cancer to living with cancer. And it took just a great amount of work and a lot of people who helped me in peer support. So finally I hit my third remission, and I was able to participate in a clinical trial, and I'm going to talk more about that in detail. And in this case, my medical oncologist was the PI who was studying a couple of different vaccines, and things were in different processes of getting open. So we took the first one that was available. Sometimes we don't get to have as much choice. 2 years into this third remission, I got breast cancer, and now I'm a pro. I walked into the doctor's office, going in to see my surgeon. I've got a stack of, everything that I saw online that maybe I might qualify for, a lot of do-it-yourself research. And what they did is, during this particular appointment with a surgeon, I thought because of my cancer history that I would be just given a mastectomy. And at that point I was like, I'm going to do a mastectomy, no reconstruction. I've had enough cutting. I really just want to be done with things. And I was offered a lumpectomy. And I said, oh, wow, we can go easy on this. Well, if we're going to go easy and just do a lumpectomy and not the more aggressive surgery, I'd really like to have a little more confirmation that the good breast is really good, that there's no cancer hiding in there. I had mammogram, which is how this was detected. Could I have an MRI? And my surgeon was like, I have enough information to go forward. No, you don't get the MRI. And I'm like, oh, I really, really want to know if I'm going to go nice and easy. It's come back before. I don't want it to come back again. And she says, no, I'm done. Let me go get the consent forms for surgery. And while I'm waiting for her to come back, I'm digging through my big stack of stuff, and I found a clinical trial. It was MRI with contrast versus, mammogram with contrast versus MRI. And I came back in the room, I'm like, can I do this? And yes, so they called downstairs, got me consented, and I had the first part of it right away. I got what I wanted, and I did not have to fight the person with a knife. Always a good thing. So I'm happy to say that now I'm in advanced practice practitioner long-term survival clinic on both sides, and the switch from cancer treatment where it's all about the cancer to survivorship clinic where it's about living and learning that some of the things I feel are just part of the privilege of aging is a really great thing. So to get back to what it was like to participate in that clinical trial, oh gosh, see, here's my animations going all crazy, but there seemed to be a lot of hurdles. And the first one was kind of a good thing. I had 3 to choose from. And selecting from them, there was one I wanted that was a couple of different proteins, but it was further down and getting approved to be opened, so I just took the first one that was available. It was a phase 1, but I was comfortable with this particular protein because another institution was using it, a different form of the protein, and we had, we have social media groups and listservs, and we're all connected and seeing what's happening, and we knew some long-term survivors who had used this, and so I was very eager and okay with doing a phase 1. The window of eligibility was very, very narrow from cancer. From the time you go into remission to the time you start the trial, it was like 6 or 8 weeks. It wasn't a very long time to get everything started. My doctor did talk to me about, well, hey, this trial's about to open, we can give you more chemo to keep you, kind of in the running for this. And, it was just another discussion that we had. There was a delay in getting it started. We decided not to start more chemo. We think it's going to start. And then a regulatory agency required like an additional skin test. And they had to get this manufactured. It was manufactured abroad, and it got lost in customs. And so there were a couple of these delays resulted in my scan being 1 week too old. And so I was really fortunate to have another scan, and the insurance, took care of it, no questions asked, because I had the good kind of insurance, and not everybody has that luxury. And at the last minute, they needed an additional sample that I don't remember reading about. There's so much going on, I'm sure I missed it, but after going through all that, Annie, we need a stool sample. Having had multiple surgeries and chemotherapy for ovarian cancer, the plumbing is just never right after that. And it was the day after I had kind of, sorry to be graphic before lunch, but I had some diarrhea, like there's nothing in there, I don't know, I'm gonna give you this and I wanna get started. And oh no, our nurse can get that for you. And so it was like the last indignity. So after going through all these hurdles, I was finally able to consent and get my remission vaccine trial. And the reason why I was so interested in this remission vaccine concept was because, before there was maintenance strategies or other things for ovarian cancer, once you hit a remission, it was watch and wait. They were going to do nothing. So doing something like this was doing something, which was better than doing nothing. So again, animations. So the first thing after I consented and went up to get my first injection was on the door, it said Experimental Treatment Center. And it kind of stopped me in my tracks for a moment. I knew this was an experiment. I mean, that's what clinical trials were. But to see it in writing just hit me at a very, very deep level. I still went through the door, and I am so glad I did. Because once I was on the other side of the door, the nurses who took care of me just were exceptional. I knew that whatever happened, they were going to take care of me, and they watched me like a hawk, and it just really increased my comfort level in participating in a clinical trial. And the other part was having the conversation about time. The first time that I had my injection, it took over 5 hours of me waiting in the waiting room. And I, as they're giving me the injection, I said to my nurse, I'm like, hey, I'm a working girl. I work like 6 blocks away. I'm in, Manhattan. And is there anything we can do? Because I can get back. And I was so glad that we were able to have a conversation where it was explained to me, well, the reason it takes that long is because we have to defrost it, then it has to go into a centrifuge, and once it's ready for you, we have 1 hour to put it in your body. And I'm like, I can be here in 15 minutes if the elevators reply on foot. Can we do that? I just didn't want to use all of my sick time and my vacation time on waiting there. And I wanted to take vacations like a normal person. And so once I came in the morning to get my bloods, I would leave with my port accessed but covered, go to work, and I would sit by that phone like I was waiting for a date for the prom. And as soon as it rang, I would run over. And so that brings me to the many privileges that I was able to have that many people don't get to have. And the first is my zip code. I live near New York City. I used to work in the city, and I had my choice of cancer centers. I had my choice of people to go for a second opinion. I had the kind of insurance that would let me have a second opinion and an extra scan. My medical oncologist was the PI, and that just high level of communication. Some people don't have that. So I think the recipe for me biggest ingredient was the communication. I could ask any question at any time. I also had time to think and reflect. I had a contact list. Who do I call and when? Things happen on the weekends, things happen after your offices close. Who's going to help us if something happens? And all of this increased my understanding. It increased clarified what the expectations were, my comfort level increased, and my satisfaction with the process increased. And this long-term survival has let me have my most important role, which is Grammy, to these three guys. They're bigger now, but I like these pictures, and it is the most important thing that I do. Thank you, science. Thank you, research, for getting me here. I am such a lucky girl. And it also allows me to volunteer in giving peer support and also in research advocacy. Many people helped me to get to where I am today, and I will tell you that with everything that happened to my body, what happened inside my own head was harder to deal with. And it took many cancer survivors who were ahead of me on the journey to take my hand and help me walk through. And so I pay that back by helping those who are coming afterwards. I was also lucky enough to get into research advocacy, trying to understand my own treatment options, had me asking questions that were deeper and different than what I asked when I was first diagnosed. And I have been so fortunate to be able to participate in research advocacy during grant reviews, translational research with a couple of spores, clinical trial concept review at NCI, regulatory area as a FDA patient representative. I've done guidelines with ASCO, and now I'm involved with clinical care delivery as part of the PFAC at my institution. I'm training to do the IRB. I'm going to say something about that in a minute. And I'm currently chair of NCI's Council of Research Advocates, and we have our meeting scheduled next Wednesday if the government doesn't shut down, but we'll see what happens there. But just a quick aside here, what I'm noticing in the IRB training is, we're trying to make so much of what we're hearing is to make things better for the participants, to make things more understandable, and I really appreciate the work of everyone who's on the regulatory side trying to do that, the getting the trials to the patients, making it easier. And one of the things in this IRB training is how our regulatory language, we're talking back from Helsinki and Belmont and the harmonization, we still use the word subjects. And as a clinical trial participant, it just is, I wish there was a way to take a magic wand and make the language more so that we're human people who are doing this. So that's my pitch here. Oh, thank you. And, as a research advocate, what we do is we're bringing the broad patient perspective into these research discussions because researchers and scientists speak in the language of data and patients speak in the language of hope. And so our role is to kind of bring that hope into research discussions as well as disseminate to our communities kind of what this means to us. So putting on my peer support hat very quickly, and I'm trying to find out we're good on time. Okay, one of the things I do most is to dispel myths. A lot of people think that clinical trials are only for a last resort, and we know that that's not true, and that you qualify for more if you do this earlier. I peer with at my institution somebody who had multiple cancers and went into a clinical trial, and she says, Annie, I didn't know that I could do this as first line, and I think not a lot of people in the general population are aware that clinical trials are sometimes just to find out if this works better. I also hear from people that they don't want to be a lab rat or treated like a guinea pig. It's like the second thing that comes up. And trying to explain to people that for some, just participating in a clinical trial people may have access to standard of care for the first time who might not. And that alone improves survival, whether or not the clinical trial works. And people are very nervous about whether or not they're going to get a placebo. Nobody wants nothing. And one of the things I explain in peer support is that in cancer clinical trials, people who have active cancer will get something. The only time you would get a placebo is if the standard of care is to watch and wait, or there is no standard of care, or if they're investigating something to make a drug that we already have work better. So some people will get the regular drug and the new drug, and some people will get the regular drug and the placebo. But I try to assure people that in cancer clinical trials, people who need treatment will get treatment. And we're out of order. There we go. And the last thing I hear is that people are connected to their current medical teams. So sometimes even in large institutions, the research study team may be different from who's giving you your day-to-day care. And when you have cancer, a lot of times your relationships with your oncology teams is a lifelong relationship, whether that's just a few weeks, years, or even longer, decades sometimes we get to have. And it is a precious relationship. And we need to be very careful and let people know that they do not have to sever this relationship to participate in clinical research. One example that I give is I had a friend who was questioning, if I do this clinical trial, who do I call if I have questions, or who is the person I called? And the person said to her, well, if you do the clinical trial, we own you now. Thank you for that response, because that's what we all felt. No, please let people know that, during the research, it's just an added layer of care in a very regulated way. But yeah, we are really, really connected to the people who saved our lives. But once I get to, explain about the protections that are in place and that people can withdraw at any time for any reason, people start to become more open about it. And in peer support, my job is not to sell clinical trials or say that this is the only way. I'm there as a sounding board and to, connect people with education so that they can make this decision about whether or not to participate is right for them. And I'm going to put this in writing because I've been misquoted, okay? But it generally takes me, as a peer, about 3 conversations from somebody who's, I will never, ever do that, I don't want to be a lab rat, to, I'll consider it, I understand now. And those conversations don't start with, you don't want to do it? Well, let me tell you why you're wrong, or how it is. It's like, I understand how you might feel that way. because there is a lot of misinformation out there. And I just want to clarify, I don't think every trial is right for every person, but I think ideally everyone should be offered a clinical trial if available at every decision point. Now, about the clinical trial barriers, and this is a peer support. We hear a lot that the biggest patient barrier is trust, and I feel that that is an academic perspective, because what I hear in my calls with people is that it's really, they can't find a trial. They might want to do a trial, and this is, again, after the myths are taken care of. I just can't find a trial. And then I don't qualify for the trial. In ovarian cancer, sometimes people have a rising CA-125 and they know that the cancer's coming back. And I know people who or their cancer's too small to be measurable to qualify for the trial. And they agonize, do I let the cancer grow so I qualify and maybe have this opportunity? Or do I go on to the next thing? And it is really, it's heartbreaking struggle that some people have to deal with. And then there are physician barriers. Did someone even invite you? We hear so many times about, oh, well, I didn't know about that. When I was interested in this clinical trial, and I went back to my doctor and I said, hey, I saw this other guy. I confessed. I didn't qualify for the trial. And I went back and said, I saw somebody else. And my doctor said, oh, I didn't know you were interested in clinical trials, because if I did, that's who I would have sent you to. So normalizing clinical trial conversations and that they exist, may be a great first start. So from the peer support perspective, it's all about the unknown. Am I gonna, is it gonna work? Well, we don't even know what the standard stuff's going to work until they put it in you. Am I going to be randomized? Am I going to get a placebo? And also, how am I going to feel? What the side effects are? And those are very real things. We hear a lot about financial toxicity and the financial barriers to clinical trials, and I want to reframe that. Getting cancer is expensive. And these are just some of the things that are hardships, whether or not someone is participating in a clinical trial. And if somebody who is, food insecure or has other financial issues, if you already have things at your institution that can help people, is there a way to fast track potential clinical trial participants into these types of things? And then just to have language about these clinical trial domains, if you're not already familiar with the work of Unger et al., I really love how it was broken down, and we've been hearing these things, and now we have language, whether the structural barrier that there's just no trial available at the institution or where the person is, the eligibility criteria, which are the clinical barriers, the physician barriers of just not asking, and the actual patient decisions, the things that the patient is going to take into consideration. And when they did this meta-analysis and they looked at, the impact and how much each type of barrier was, it was the structural and clinical barriers that are keeping people out. And I feel so much of the talk about barriers is about how do we fix patients to want to do this, when what we need to do is fix systems and get more trials to the people. So I'm really excited about the work of decentralized clinical trials. One of my colleagues and mentors, Dicey Scroggins, she died last year of a secondary cancer, but we'd been hearing so much about, well, people don't qualify because of Tuskegee. And we had a conversation and that's not what we're hearing from the people that we peer with. We think that's an academic perspective. And so we went to gynecologic cancer survivors and did our advocate-initiated research to ask, did you participate in a trial? If you did, or you didn't, why not? And we had about 2/3 of the people did not participate and about 1/3 did. And I'm just gonna kind of bring this, okay, let's go the wrong way. So the people who didn't participate, they just weren't asked. And we thought that was that was what we're hearing. I didn't participate because nobody told me about it. But what I thought was really interesting too is the second most frequent response was other. And out of the other, about half of them were because, well, I didn't need it, so I got into remission, or this worked for me. And so it was very interesting. And then, the same on the people who did participate in trials. Most of them heard from their doctor. And they did it because their doctor recommended it. I think this is the best option for you. And what that tells me is that in oncology, or at least in gynecologic cancers, patients trust their doctors. And if that question doesn't come up, they don't have an opportunity to say yes or no. But the other thing that we thought was really interesting was we asked people, would you do it again? And 100% said yes or I'm not sure. Nobody said no or prefer not to answer. And we know from some of the free text answers that some of these people did not get the result that they were hoping for in the clinical trial. And if you're ever doing any research with or surveys with patients, have some lines where they can put in free text, because they will tell you stuff. That's where I think the most interesting information comes from. And then this is just in another place, so how do their comments add up? They didn't learn about it, my doctor didn't tell me, well, that's a physician barrier. A trial for my specific situation is a structural barrier. No clinical trial in my country, that's a structural barrier. And so, there were kind of like three here that I think were on the patient, and it's their right to choose not to participate. I'm also very excited, Unger et al. Also had an article about, when offered to participate. And, we hear about clinical trial participation being about, 10 or 15%, really, really low, especially compared to in the pediatric space. And what they found was that if you ask people, they're going to participate about, I can't remember, about half the time. They'll say yes. And so think of how much your accrual might go up if everybody was just asked if it was appropriate, if we didn't pre-screen them before we ask them. But I know that you have things that you have to do internally, so I won't go there. But like my mentor Dicey used to say, clinical trials are like a party. You need an invitation to get in, and we can't go to the party if we don't get an invitation. So I am really excited about some of the things that are happening to reduce clinical and physician barriers. If on the eligibility criteria side, Friends of Cancer Research is just trying to broaden that. And every time I serve on a clinical trial concept review, we're just like jumping all over this. You need to align. You need to align with this language. And we're starting to have people align. And we're also the Just Ask initiative that ASCO is doing. What we hear when there is a culture of asking everybody, that the consent rates go up to 2 out of 3. And where I was in Georgia, the research team has such a good relationship with the community that they think they're at like 90% saying yes. And of course, we're also trying to keep the COVID, what we learned from COVID with the telehealth consent, having lab tests at home, mailing oral agents, as well as a little bit of less rigidity in the timing of scans and treatments to kind of accommodate people who are traveling. And the one thing I want to talk about learning from COVID is speed. We learned that people can change fast. We know it's possible, and I hope we keep pushing that to have a little bit more speed in making changes. And also, where's our cancer mRNA vaccine? Really quick about the consent process. It is a process. Once people even find a trial, it's not the piece of paper, and I'm hearing a lot of that in this room. I really appreciate the work that is being done. It needs to be shorter. It's too much, and it's sometimes not enough. And, having translation for people who speak other languages, or even for health literacy. If you have people who are helping you, on the patient side, to see if the language is okay, make sure they're not all doctors and lawyers and scientists. Can you get people who are not? If you really want good feedback on if this is understandable, can you utilize some of, the housekeeping staff or your security guards or somebody who just isn't in this language every day? And then just back to the financial hardships. One thing that I think we don't pay enough attention to is that time off. People are having to come off of work, or they have to travel. They're sitting in your waiting rooms for all day, and sometimes there's someone with them. Their caregiver took off work. Maybe there's a baby at home, a pet. Maybe they care for someone elderly. This time of being there is just, it's a huge investment. And there's some things we don't even know about. And from the research advocate perspective, when I first joined the Council of Research Advocates, I was on a working group on clinical trials enrollment and retention. We were pretty much trying to quantify, things that could be done to help with financial toxicity. And in the literature, there just wasn't enough things that were published that rose to the level that we could use for a guideline. But we did have some out-of-scope suggestions, and one of them was about justifiable reimbursement. Some people think it's coercion to, pay for someone's parking or give them a little something so that they can get a hamburger in your at the cafeteria. This is not coercion, and the FDA guidance says so. So it's right there. And the other thing, there's a working group out of NCI also trying to decrease trial complexity. So we're like, hey, whatever they say, please do. And so from the research advocate perspective, I like to think about who is missing from research and who is missing from teams. And I always, kind of focus on who has unchanged high mortality. I like to think about the rare cancers and the rare subtypes and where are the equity and knowledge gaps. There's so many biomarker-driven trials that are going to inform the later trials, and we don't have everybody there, so we have missing information. So it is just so crucial to, include everybody in this. And in your teams, is there inclusive and broad representation? When you're going to other stakeholders, are you seeing the whole catchment area? Do you have access to people who can share their stories of implicit bias and how the system has failed them? I think if you haven't seen some of this, it is very powerful, and everybody in the medical field and in the advocacy field should. And ways we can help are in the design, the barriers, the consent forms, having patient advocates on your team can really help you. So my final thoughts is, clinical trials means hope to so many of us. And we want to participate in clinical trials, especially once we understand, that we're protected and that this could give us more options. But there's a lot of difficulties. So I thank you all for thinking about things to make things easier for all people to participate. I thank you so much for your time.
Wow, what a wonderful talk and way to just end this plenary session. Annie, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your grandbabies, and for reminding us all why we do this every day, but that we still have work to do, even changing the language you're using from saying subjects to participants. So I think if we all make that effort, we'll get there. We do have a few minutes for questions. If anyone has questions for Annie, there's microphones in the middle, and you can just step on up.
Thank you so much for this presentation. My name is Hala Gosen. I'm a research pharmacist. I work for University of Texas Medical Branch. I have a question. You mentioned something about clinical trials means hope. How can we help the public know more about clinical trials and make them feel more comfortable to participate? I don't want to say subjects anymore. I'm going to try to change it to participants. So how can we help them to participate more in clinical trials and know more about it? Because a lot of people think we're experimenting with them and don't have or don't grasp the idea about what it means to do a clinical trial and the benefits that you can get out of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your work and for that question. I think it's a really difficult question because we know that there's a lot of misinformation out there. And when I think of education, are we educating the general public or are we generating the patients who come into your front doors? And how you might do that might be two different things. One of the things that kind of drives me nuts is if you just type in, clinical trials, basics 101 for lay people, it all starts with phase 1 is to, what's the safe dose? Phase 2 is this. And, that's kind of meaningless. One of the ways I've done it is that, we're asking questions and we have to answer these in a very regulated way to gather that information. And how I put it is, phase 1, we're at, is it safe? But, but being so technical and really different communities will have different needs. So there is no one size fits all. Here, I don't think we're ever going to have a universal, this is what will make people accept it. But if there's a community that you're trying to reach, engage with people in that community and they will help you with what they don't understand and what they need to know. And then you can work together to show how to deliver that. Thanks. I'll let you drive.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Frudiger. I'm a lead clinical research associate. And having worked in oncology for over 10 years, one thing that I often heard from investigators is that they didn't offer clinical trials to patients that were uninsured. Now, even with the expansion of the Affordable Care Act, we have millions in this country that are uninsured, and unfortunately, they are marginalized populations mostly. What can we do as an industry to mitigate or reduce or even eliminate this type of financial toxicity?
If anybody knows, please, come there. It's, at the NCI, we meet with the director 3 times a year and we get our director's report. And a lot of times we'll see maps. And the map of persistent poverty just about overlaps with the map of highest cancer mortality. And it just breaks my heart every single time because where I live, my zip code shouldn't determine whether I live or die. And I think, again, participating in clinical trials, especially for people who are underinsured and are not serviced by the medical system, it elevates their care to standard of care. Standard of care should be the floor for everybody, and it's not. Yeah, I'm sorry. But I completely agree with you, and there are studies that show that just participating in a clinical trial can help some people have longer survival, whether that trial was positive or not. So I don't know the answer. I wish I had the answer. I wish I had insurance to give to everybody. I really do, because I'm alive because of insurance and where I live.
Hi, my name is Jifa Dordunu, and I really, really, really appreciated your presentation. It really spoke to my heart. So I'm a professor in the School of Nursing and also previous clinical researcher. And I'm just curious from your experience, because in talking to patients, or participant and research participants, one of the things they talk about is the way we construct our research protocols, our designing of our studies, does not capture their experience, right? So for example, when the COVID vaccine was being rolled out, I had a lot of patients or people from the African community that were reaching out saying, my period is not here. And I've talked to 20 different people and they say, this has nothing to do with the vaccine that I just got. But before I got the vaccine, everything was going really well. So I'm just curious from your perspective, how can we in the research, particularly in the research arena, construct our research designs to be able to capture that experiences that is not captured in the protocols?
So thank you so much for that question and the work that you do. I think the first thing is what we tell our survivors in our communities is, you know, if there is an adverse effect that isn't being collected and no one's listening to you, the FDA has a place where you can report things, and if there's enough hits, they will have a meeting about it, and it gets enough attention. And I don't have that memorized right now, but it's one way to give that a voice, right? The second thing is I am a huge, you know, it's so, we're at a time where we're trying to be regular, you know, streamline things and not make so much of a burden administratively, but at the same time, we need to collect this information. And I'm a huge believer in PROs that, you know, get it straight from the patient if there's any way we can get it in real time, because 3 weeks later, I don't remember how bad, you know, the diarrhea was or how bad I was dizzy or, you know, it's all reflection. And I think in this day and age where there's a lot of things coming up together that are similar, they're not going up against each other. They're going up against the old stuff, right? So we really never get to see them head to head. And from a patient perspective, I want to know how I'm going to feel on it. And I don't think we're going to capture that, you know, without PROs, which again, it's another layer of stuff to do and stuff to collect and missing data. Yeah, and I think, you know, and do you guys have safeguards internally that when you're hearing things like this, who do you go to? Do you go back to the IRB? Do you report it up to regulatory? I mean, because that should flip a switch, and somehow, if what we're doing is protecting patients.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question in the middle here.
So I'm Alicia Cook, and I am an IRB professional, but I'm also a 20-year breast cancer survivor, so congratulations to you. But one of the things that I think about as a advocate myself is, you know, I always tell people to advocate for yourself, but how are you finding clinical trials? Like, I always want to give somebody a direction. What are they doing? Because obviously you advocated for yourself. You found your own trial. How did you do that?
Yeah, well, you know, back before Facebook, there was one place, there was like the old ACOR list, the American Cancer Online Research. It was a listserv. Do you remember that? Have you been around? Okay. So now with all the different social media and there's closed Facebook groups, we're a little bit more fragmented, but I can tell you a couple of things. We compare notes. You know, we talk to each other, and I actually got in trouble because when knowing about the clinical trial, and this was before I knew that phase 1 was just a few people, I was telling everybody, hey, I'm going to do this. I think I'm going to do this, and then they had too many more patients who wanted to get in. Then they had spots open. And so I got a little bit slapped on the hand and said, you know, you can't do that. But word of mouth is a powerful thing. And some survivors are connected. There are some communities that are very vocal. I know people who are on certain agents that make their own private face group, you know, places. They're talking to each other while they're in the trial. So clinicaltrials.gov is not current. Some advocacy organizations have, you know, Emerging Med or something on that. It is really a struggle to find trials, and especially if you don't understand the language and don't search them right. And if things get more complex in your history, what I heard from one of the advocacy organizations I'm in, that if they have somebody make a phone call to the emerging med navigators, they have a higher rate of actually consenting to be in a clinical trial than somebody who just tries to do it on their own. So talking to people and walking them through the process is really important. But yeah, everybody struggles because what's out there is just not good, and it's not comprehensive, it's not updated in real time. We need to do better.